You know, people have this habit of testing the quiet ones. They think you'll always take it. They think your patience is endless, your kindness automatic, your forgiveness guaranteed. They mistake your composure for softness and your calmness for fear. For the longest time, you let it slide. You held back your reactions. You try to understand, try to explain, try to stay decent even when they didn't deserve decency. Because that's who you are. Or at least, that's who you were. But something changed, didn't it? At some point, the pressure stopped hurting and started revealing. You saw what they were doing. You saw how they fed off your emotional responses, how every time you reacted, they felt validated. And once you noticed that pattern, the game ended. Not because they stopped playing, but because you stopped participating. Your silence didn't appear out of nowhere. It wasn't some dramatic exit, some emotional collapse. It was a decision, calm, steady, final. It was the moment you realized they had mistaken your heart for a weakness and your understanding for a leash. And the second you withdrew your energy, they felt it. Oh, they felt it hard. Because people like them survive on attention. They need your reactions to feel relevant. They need your emotions to feel powerful. But when you stopped giving them access, when you stopped responding, explaining, defending, you became unpredictable. And unpredictable men terrify manipulators. They always expected you to bend, never expected you to disappear. See, that's the thing about men who've suffered quietly. We don't explode, we evaporate. We fade from their world so silently that they only notice the loss when the peace hits them like a punch. They kept pushing you thinking you'd break. But what they didn't realize is that every push sharpened you. Every disrespect built a wall. Every manipulation drained the last drop of tolerance you had left. And when that tolerance finally burned out, something powerful emerged. A version of you that didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't justify. A version of you that didn't go to war, but went cold. Not the cold that comes from bitterness, the cold that comes from clarity. Because clarity changes everything. Clarity shows you who they are. Clarity shows you who you are. And clarity removes any desire to keep fixing someone who keeps breaking you. When you became silent, they panicked. Not because they loved you, not because they cared, but because they lost the ability to control the narrative. Your silence forced them to hear their own thoughts, their own guilt, their own flaws. And trust me, people who rely on chaos absolutely crumble when they're left alone with themselves. They didn't miss you. They missed the version of you that absorbed their mess. The version that explained what they refused to see. The version that softened their guilt and cushioned their consequences. But that version of you, he's gone. Buried the moment you finally understood your worth wasn't tied to their validation. Your silence was not an act of retreat. It was an act of evolution. The men who grow in silence are the ones who return unrecognizable, stronger, sharper, untouchable. You see, people think strength looks loud. They imagine roaring, fighting, arguing, proving. But real strength, masculine strength, it's quiet, it's controlled, it's intentional. When someone pushes you beyond your limit, they expect destruction. They expect anger, chaos, a meltdown they can twist into another excuse to blame you. But when you give them peace instead, that's when they truly feel fear. Because peace is not passive. Peace is power. Peace is a declaration. I don't need this. I don't need you. I don't need the chaos you thrive on. And when you chose peace, you chose yourself. Do you know the most dangerous man in the room? It's the one who no longer reacts. Not because he's numb, but because he's aware. Aware that the game is rigged. Aware that the arguments are cycles. aware that explaining to the wrong people is just another way of wasting life. A man who understands that becomes untouchable. That's what you became. That's why they panicked. They watched you move differently, speak differently, focus differently. They realized they couldn't read you anymore, couldn't provoke you, couldn't drag you back into the emotional maze they built. You developed boundaries, real ones, not the soft ones they used to break, but solid, quiet, unshakable boundaries. Every time they tried to cross them, they didn't find anger. They found indifference. And indifference is lethal to people who depend on control. Your silence was a mirror. It showed them exactly who they were without your effort cleaning up the reflection. And once they saw their own patterns, the guilt started creeping in, the regret followed, and the fear settled. Why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he explaining? Why isn't he chasing? Because you evolved. Because you grew. Because you finally understood that not every battle deserves your sword. Some just deserve your absence. And absence? That's the one thing manipulators can't handle. They have no strategy for it, no tools, no control. They thought you needed them, but it turns out you were the one giving meaning to their existence. You were the stability in their chaos. You were the anchor in their games. And when the anchor left, everything collapsed. They always assumed your reactions kept you tied, but your lack of reaction proved the truth. You had detached long before they realized anything was wrong. You didn't leave suddenly. You left silently. In your mind first, in your heart next, and finally in your behavior. And by the time they noticed, you were already gone. The silence they mocked became the silence that haunted them. The peace they thought was weakness became the peace that exposed their entire nature. Because here's the truth. A man who chooses peace after being provoked is a man who knows his worth. A man who doesn't respond is a man who understands that some people are not worth the energy. A man who walks away is a man who has mastered himself. Your silence wasn't empty. It was full of resolve, full of growth, full of healing. And that healing terrified them. Because a healed man becomes a man they can no longer reach, no longer influence, no longer break. They pushed you thinking they'd damage you, but all they did was force your transformation. They thought they were weakening you, but all they did was train you to outgrow them. And the greatest revenge? You didn't have to destroy them. You just had to outgrow them. Silent, stoic, stronger than ever. They expected chaos, but you gave them calmness. They expected tears, but you gave them indifference. They expected weakness, but you rose with a power they never imagined. And now they finally understand. You didn't stop reacting because you were hurt. You stopped reacting because you healed. And once a man heals, he becomes untouchable.